Mm-hmm. All right, here we go. Somebody read Basic Christianity. Read that introductory part there before we get into the questions. Some years ago.
Some years ago, I received a letter from a young man I knew slightly. I have just made a great discovery, he wrote. Almighty God had two sons. Jesus Christ was the first, I am the second. I glanced at the address at the top of the letter. He was writing from a well-known psychiatric hospital. There have, of course, been many pretenders to greatness and to divinity. Psychiatric hospitals are full of deluded people who claim to be Julius Caesar, the Prime Minister, the President of the United States, or Jesus Christ. But no one believes them. No one is deceived except themselves. They have no disciples except perhaps their fellow patients. They fail to convince other people simply because they don't actually seem to be what they claim to be. Their claims are not supported by their character. Now, the Christian's conviction about Christ is greatly strengthened by the fact that he does appear to be who he said he was. There is no inconsistency between his words and his deeds.
Yeah, that's something important. I mean, can you guys even remember, and I say this, at the time where you maybe were reading the Gospels before you were a believer, and when you were not, did you ever think to yourself, something doesn't correspond here? This guy seems shady. You're talking about the person of Christ. Did that ever cross your mind? Even maybe when you were an unbeliever, did you read it? I'm not saying did you say, well, this is not true, but did the issue of what he was claiming to be in his character did his character ever come into question in your thinking? That's unique. That's very unique in terms of how, someone that's claiming to be Christ, someone that's claiming to be the Son of God, and yet his character is never really called into question, which tells you that the two go hand in hand, that it's very likely that he, if you are from an unbelieving point of view, that he is who he says that he is. And I have run across people, and we've all experienced where you run across people that make these claims, that they have done this and they've accomplished that. And it's funny because when people start making these really high claims of things that they've done and they've accomplished, the first thing that my mind goes to is, you're a turd head, or something like that right there. In terms of, I know who you are, and you're claiming that was recorded. I've got to. None of your. Bird. I said bird. B-I-R-D. Bird head.
I thought you said T-U-R-D.
I thought you said T.
All right, but you know what I'm saying? But it's funny because if you know someone, the first thing when somebody starts making a claim, I automatically almost go to their character and think, do these things go together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. I went to high school with a guy that he moved there when he was in high school, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm from Kentucky, and I was probably the best player on my football team, and I just remember looking at the guy going, no, you weren't the best player. If you were the best player on your football team, you had a really bad team. I could just tell by his stature. He wasn't all that good. He was really pudgy, and there wasn't a mean bone. You could tell there really wasn't a mean bone in his body. I just, out of observation, I had him figured out within 20 seconds that a lot of his claims didn't do it. And he was, this braggart. I did that. We won the state champion. We did this, and we won that. And we get on down the line. He says, yeah, man. He says, I hit a guy so hard one time I killed him right on the football field. And I just remember thinking, and so I gave him a nickname, and I feel bad. I feel bad about this, but this was before I was a believer, and I was like, and I called him the Kentucky Killer. And so everybody on the football team was like, called him the Kentucky Killer from then on out. But, it was just automatically between the claims that he was making, you could make that connection. This is just baloney. Yeah. But when you look at the person of Christ, And there were some that did not believe that he was a Messiah. But the one thing that we're going to see, I think, in today's passage is that there was a direct correlation between his claims and his character. That's never really... His character is brought into question, but it's fraudulent claims. Because anybody who knew him knew that there was a connection and a correlation between who he was as an individual and the claims that he was making.
Even the people that I know now and the conversations I've had, they might argue the Bible.
Yeah.
But they don't malign Jesus. I mean, they may say, "Oh, he was just crazy," but they haven't necessarily read.
Yes.
And if they have read the words, they don't have anything concrete that they can point to.
Well, just think. Let's go back to Lewis's claims. Jesus Christ was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. Okay. When you look at those three arguments, if Christ is who he claimed to be, he's either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he was Lord. The whole liar thing, when you talk about that with other people, it's funny how they talk about it, because they always talk about him as a good teacher. He's a good moral teacher. He's good. He teaches us things that we need in our lives. But this whole being God thing, and it's funny that they do that. Why is it? Because they really can't point to anything that says this guy was really an absolute lunatic. He claimed to be one thing, but yet he was another. A lot of times those arguments, you have to think about them. These are logical conceptions. Either he was who he says he was, he was Lord, or he was a liar. Well, if he was a liar and he was making all this stuff, then that takes the argument down that he was a good teacher because he's walking around lying about who he was. But that is a possibility. That's how the Jewish authorities saw him,
Right.
that he was a liar. Or the lunatic part, that's a possibility. I think there were some views probably within the Jewish leadership that thought that he was probably lunatic-ish, maybe. But as far as other people, not so much. So anyway, let's get back over to these reflection questions on page 22. It says, when you have been deceived by someone who turned out not... when have you been deceived by someone who turned out not to be what they seemed?
Like the Kentucky Killer.
Yeah. And once the Kentucky Killer got to football practice, he was not...
He was found out.
He was found out. He was more like a Kentucky doughboy. I'm saying that as an overweight old man, out of shape. When have you ever been deceived?
I'm trying to play football either.
I had,
Sure.
aside from the former husband, the college roommate, freshman year, she was the only roommate I ever had because she ruined me for anybody else. She seemed really nice and really shy retiring. And she knew some of the people there at the school, but she would talk about them. And so I was like, okay, kind of give me some backstory, so I know who these people are. But then it was, she would make their names, like there was a friend Peggy who was overweight, who she called Piggy, and I was like, well, that's not very
Kind of like
nice.
Kentucky Killer?
Yeah, and then she says mean things about other people. And how did I discover the truth? I found out she was saying mean things about me, which was a life lesson. I was so upset and devastated, but it was a life lesson for me of, if they do that to other people, you are not exempt from that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's part of who they are. So it was really, really bad. I went out and got super drunk because I was so devastated that my friend was not a friend and she was a backstabber. So it did. No more roommates for me.
Yeah. Well, most of us have probably experienced that or something very similar to that in our lifetime. Which gets to the second question: how did you discover the truth about that person?
I
had a friend that did the same thing. It was my coworker. We would have coffee break together. We'd have lunch together. One day I walked. There was a small office, and she sat in there, and I sat in another building. And I walked up to the office door, and I heard all four ladies talking about me.
Yeah, that's all.
What is she doing? What is she doing over there all day? How come we gotta help her with her work? She's doing this and she's doing that. And I heard my friend.
Oh yeah.
And I'm
Wow.
like,
That's perfect.
oh, so I walk in, I'm like, hi Lisa, oh hey, how you doing? You know, and so I did my business. I didn't engage in conversation, and I left, swearing I will never speak to her again. And I went home that day, and I'm coming to work the next day. It's like, I'm just never going to talk to her again. This is just, I feel the knife in my back.
Mm-hmm.
And on Moody, which I listen to every day, they were preaching about forgiveness. And forgiveness happens before the offense. So I had to forgive her before she hurt me.
Yeah.
And I just, Lord, what am I going to do? And I knew I never talked to her again because that wasn't an option now.
Yeah.
So I took her to lunch and I said, I heard you talking about me, and we talked about it. And then I told her about what the Lord told me on the way to work, and I witnessed to her.
Wow.
And so now I'm not all that good because haven't always done that, but there was one time that I remember standing in the door and listening to everything.
Sure.
I mean, you know, people talk about you behind your back, but usually you don't get to hear it. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So when you heard that incident, much like Liz's, their words and their actions revealed truly what their character was.
Mm-hmm.
They were go-behinds. You know, they were willing to criticize you, you know, to your face. You know, this is Maction. You and I are friends. We're this. We're that. We're tight. We're at this level. But behind your back, they revealed what their true character was. Yes.
But I did not trust her again.
Oh no!
No,
Yes,
ever.
yes, sure. That's right. And if you were to trust her on a human level, it would be only because she did something to gain that trust back. Right.
I'll be brief, but my parents were church planters, missionaries, and so we didn't stay anywhere very long. We moved a lot, and we were in California for 8 years, and it was the longest that we'd ever really been anywhere. And I made good friends with, and I was in a youth group, so there were two girls, and we were good friends, but we weren't. And they would invite me over and to go on a date with the boy. Well, whatever, if Daphne wants to do it, then you can do it, because Daphne is Miss Goody Two Shoes. Daphne is a good Christian girl, and if Daphne can do it, then you can do it. So then they would try and convince me to do these things, and I'm like, can we just go hang out at your house, you know? And so then, like the same, talking behind my back, doing this. It wasn't till we moved from California to New Orleans when I was 16 and joined the youth group there, and that is really the first place that I met true friends. And I heard them, you know, you overhear them sticking up for me behind my back, and that's what you want, you
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt.
Right. But their character's revealed in their actions, and that's the important thing. Well, let's look at John. The passages here in your book, John 13, 1 through 17. And somebody read the first 7 verses, then somebody else pick up in verse 8 and finish it out.
It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So, he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand.
Somebody else?
No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, not everyone is clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them.
Yeah, this is a very interesting passage, very good. As we studied it, back not long ago on our Sunday morning series. Let's look at this first question. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. What did he do as a result of this knowledge? In verses 3 and 4. What did he do? Now think about it. I guess think about it in terms of who he was. He was the Son of God. He knew he was the Son of God. He knew he was the Messiah. But John tells us in a couple of places that there was this kind of transaction where God gives over, the Father gives authority to the Son, authority and power. I don't know, I think it's earlier in John's Gospel where he was giving authority over life and death, and he was given authority to judge that as Jesus explained it. But, with that being known, what did he do as a result of the knowledge that he had been given this power? What was his response?
Became a servant.
Yeah, he became a servant. Verse 3 and 4 says that he got up from his meal, he took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. That's pretty significant. And it should have been a telltale sign, and it later would become a telltale sign for his disciples. In the moment, they didn't get it, especially Peter. And I don't want to get ahead of my questions there, but he did just like that. He served. He prepared himself for service when he had every right. I think I'll
The
get.
sermons that are always drawn on the walls always have the half on the waist. Right? They don't have the tunic.
I don't know. I'm not super familiar. I would imagine that they would be probably dressed quite differently in terms of that. I do know about the services. A servant would never, ever, the washing of feet was always done by a servant.
Right.
Matter of fact, the majority of the time, especially within the Jewish home and context, it wouldn't even just purely be a servant. The majority of the time, it would be a slave. It would be a slave.
And you would know them by their clothing.
Yes.
Like the nurse, and because of what she wears.
Yes.
And the housekeeper because of what they wear.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference.
Yes.
And so for him to put a towel around his waist immediately puts him into that category.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good observation. Very, very good observation. And it was he was their teacher, and that's exactly what he was doing. He was his teachers. He was teaching the disciples.
It reminds me of that passage in Philippians where it says, even though he was in the form of God, he did not consider equality was
Yes.
not something to be grasped, but he
Humbled himself. Yeah. It's a very good parallel passage with that. Yeah. And I did a couple things there. Look at that box at the bottom of the page. To wash the feet of the guest at a feast was the office of a slave. That's what I said. The disciples, that just shows you how perceptive I am. The disciples of the rabbis were supposed to render the master's personal service, but a service like this would never be dreamt of. So if there wasn't, for example, a servant within the house to wash the feet, then it would be the disciples' job or the student's job to wash the feet of the teacher. But what Jesus does is he actually just turns that whole paradigm on its head. As a matter of fact, when you talk about him preaching the kingdom, a lot of the things when he talks about preaching the kingdom of heaven or preaching the kingdom of God, this whole kingdom principle, oftentimes the paradigm is turned upon its head throughout much of what he teaches. And this idea that, yes, in the natural world, the rabbi sits up and everybody else serves him. But in kingdom living, it's the opposite, And that's part of what, happens, in terms of why people don't grasp a lot of what's going on about Jesus' teaching, because what you're saying does not make a connection to the real world. And God uses that. That's the whole thing. He uses this new paradigm to completely and totally change how life and ministry should be. The world says masters, teachers, students, and slaves wash feet. But Jesus taking that paradigm and turning on his head, he says, no, in my kingdom things will be done differently.
Did you hear about the Kansas City pastor this past week?
No.
He told his congregation and called them a bunch of names because they hadn't bought him this watch that was anywhere from $350 to $3,500.
Mm-hmm.
Called them all kinds of cheapskates.
Cheap. Yep.
And I was like, dude, what happened to role modeling of Jesus Christ? I don't think Jesus said, I'm going to wash your feet, and for that, you're going to give me a watch. I don't think so.
I need a new pair of tennis shoes.
Right.
Yeah,
And I want the Jordan one,
yeah,
and I want them in this color.
Yeah, but he turns that on its head by turning around and serving his people. In my kingdom, service looks like this. In man's kingdom, service looks like this. And matter of fact, man's kingdom, it's the bottom man on the totem pole serves the guy in the upper echelons in man's kingdom. But in my kingdom, the greatest among you will be the least.
Those that are first shall be last.
And those that are first will be last, and those that last will be first. That's the upside down paradigm. And let me just pull, this is a preaching moment here. If we're ever truly going to impact the world with the gospel, we must use the upside down paradigm. You're not going to do it by saying, we're going to go out. Because somebody posed this question to me one time. If you were in the place of Jesus Christ, this is just a theoretical question. If you were in the place of Jesus Christ and you wanted to change the world, how would you do it? And I remember when that was first posed, that question, I remember thinking, all right, if I had 12 people, if I just used kind of what he used, and if I was going to draft 12 people onto my team in order to change the world, man, I need a cut-rate theologian, somebody that knows, Hebrew, Greek, studied from Genesis to Revelation, somebody like Dr. Carson down at Trinity. I need a guy like that on my team. But all right, I need an evangelist. I need a human soul trap that whoever comes into contact with them, they hear the gospel with clarity. I need the evangelist. Then I need the organizer, the planner. And I just remember going through all of these, things. That's not what Jesus did. He took a bunch of ragtag, ragamuffin, for the most part, fishermen, uneducated. No, I say uneducated. They weren't uneducated in the sense of they were trained in Torah. They knew how to read and write. They studied the Torah. They knew the Word of God. But he took a bunch of ragtag fishermen. He took a tax collector. He took a zealot, a religious zealot. He took those 12 guys and he absolutely radically transformed the world. So,
Even with the bad guy. Even with Judas.
Even with Judas, a rotten apple, a deceiver, a trickster, a liar. You know,
He saw things through the world's eyes.
Yes.
And at the end, he recanted.
Mm-hmm.
I was wrong. Take your silver back.
Too late.
Yep.
But, you know, and that should teach us a lot about when we think about wanting our church to move forward, wanting revival, wanting growth, wanting all these things. Listen to me. I'm not saying that we need to be stupid and turn our brains off. That's not what I'm saying. But the only way that true revival, true growth, true ministry will ever take place is when we become God's vessel, and are the conduit by which God works. And let me tell you something. He works through some mighty strange and weird people sometimes. I'm one of them. I give you an example. This is just part of my testimony, just a small bit. No one in my family had ever been to college. Ever. My mom's side or my dad's side. Mom's side, old coal miners. They graduated, if they even graduated from school, or they got up to age, they went to work. You know, just like what you would think in the old days. Same thing with my dad's family. Although, back a couple of generations, my dad's family was very wealthy, very well-to-do. Then my grandfather happened to be the black sheep of the family. Ruined things for the next generation. He wanted to be a farmer, and so he became a farmer. And so, you know, he graduated probably from high school, but my dad finished 9th grade. That was it. My mom graduated from high school, and there was never an expectation for any of us kids to do anything any different. We just do what your parents did. That's common. And my dad expected that I would do what... I was a good builder like my dad was. My other brothers were too, but they went off into different professions. And just started at the bottom and worked their way up. And then I was probably going to follow my dad's footsteps and be a builder because I loved it. Now that being said, that was the expectation. But God changed, got a hold of me, and used me in a way that I never in a million years would have ever guessed. Would have ever guessed that I would leave St. Clair County, Alabama, a town of about 4,000 or 5,000 people, raised up by a farmer/builder, and go and preach the gospel and train people in another country and learn 2 more different languages and all that kind of stuff. I would have never dreamed that. That was not even in my wildest dreams. And to be right here with you now. You know, here's my point. It has nothing to do with me. And it has everything to do with when we're willing to submit ourselves to God. And I have a couple of times in my life. I'm not saying this as I am a person that submits to the will of God in all things. I'm just as rebellious as the average person about wanting to do my own thing. But the few times that I have gone to God and said, I'm going to submit to you in these things, He's done beyond what I would have ever guessed and used me in ways that I would have never assumed ever in my lifetime. Now, if we could do that consistently in our lives and collectively in our lives, then there's no limit to what we could see God doing in and through us as a local church. I'm digressing. Let's move on. Number 2. How does his action contradict what we would expect a person to do with such knowledge?
perhaps think he would designate somebody to wash others' feet.
Oh, that's good. I like that. That's a good way of thinking. Yeah. Jesus, if he was really good, he would go,
Delegate.
Wash their
delegate.
feet.
Yeah, wash their feet. Wash their feet, right? That's good. Any other thoughts?
Well, if you combine this particular section of that time, because in the other Gospels, around the same time, the disciples were once again arguing about who was going to be the greatest,
Yeah.
which seems to be a theme of their lives. And, you know, other times Jesus would say, oh, okay, let me address this. You got to be the least. Okay, let me address this. You got to be like a little child. Okay, let me address this. He who is last will be first. Okay, let me address this. When you go to a banquet, I mean, you know, he told them a million times in different ways. And it's almost like at this point he just goes, you know, I mean, you would expect maybe a strong lecture that gets really, really pointed, even more so, right?
Yeah.
And instead he goes, okay, you're really not getting it, so I'll show you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good points
Yeah.
all along the way.
Did great demonstration. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
And isn't that how we learn a lot of times? Like somebody can tell us something, but when we see it done,
Mm-hmm.
especially to us,
Mm-hmm.
it connects better,
Mhm.
I think.
Oh, absolutely. I've always been interested on theories of education, and one of the general theory that where we are as a culture, that if you just give somebody a list and they can read that list, then they can learn how to do something. Maybe that's really a bad way. And that hasn't always been true in our culture. Matter of fact, it wasn't that long ago that parents actually taught their children how to live life. Parents taught their children skills on how to succeed in life and provide for your family. And what would happen if you were a farmer, for example, and you had children, when that children was of working age, which meant probably about 5 or 6 years old, that's when they would begin going with their father to the field. And it's not like the father says, I'm going to teach you how to be a farmer. Here's a book on beginning farming. Go into your room and read this book. That's not how that works. What he would do is he'd take that 5 or 6 year old kid to his ability, and he would give him responsibility. He would show him. I'm going to show you, for example, how to clean out the chicken pen. Okay? We're going to go in. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to collect the eggs. You know, this is what we're going to do. And I'm going to show you, you're going to look in these boxes, but every once in a while, some sneaky little hen will get lazy and she'll lay one over in the corner or at this point, and you need to look here. And then, you know, after a while, once the chicken poop gets up to about this high, you need to get the shovel and get something. We're going to get in here and we're going to scoop this out. And just begin to demonstrate to the young, this is going to be your responsibility soon. And go out and follow and watch, follow and watch, follow and watch. And then when the time comes, Dad takes the kid out there and says, you're going to clean the chicken pen and I'm going to milk the cow. And then Dad will circle back a little bit later and say, you did a good job, or you missed this, or you need to do this better. And it become a time of training. We no longer, I think as humans, we abdicate our responsibility of teaching and training one another, and we relegate it to things like the university, even corporations to some degree. And I think those are generally bad things. I say generally, listen, I know nothing about the telecommunications world, so I could not really tell or train my child in that thing. Yes, let that corporation do that. But there are general principles of kids not being able to work, don't know anything about how to clean house. I have handed a 16-year-old kid a broom, and my head almost fell off when I watched them try to figure out how to use it. And here's my point. You're 16 years old, and you don't even know how to use a broom.
They were pushing it.
They were pushing it. They literally had a sweeping broom, like a back and forth sweeping broom, and they put it down the floor, and they just, like this
Like
right
a
here.
vacuum cleaner.
Almost like a vacuum cleaner. And it almost made me angry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It almost made me angry. But, here's my point. Which I've forgotten. But I think I know where I was going.
Modeling is what Jesus was doing.
Modeling. We must model. That's where we learn. And we must do that in the church.
Even when you don't think you're teaching, you are teaching others by what you're doing. They're watching you.
That's
You know what I
right.
mean?
Well, yes.
Oh, I have something. This was from Tony Raymond from our church, helped me at the salon some with organization when he was between jobs, and he had this little wooden piece model, and I liked it. He said that in our culture, we think that we're transferring a skill, like me teaching Sharon something by saying, now you watch me do this, Sharon, now you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the two-step thing doesn't work as well as a four-step thing. And he said there's 4 steps to transferring a skill. It would be, Sharon, watch me do this. Now I want you to come over here and help me do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to come over here and help you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're going to do it, and I'm just going to watch you.
Yeah, it's very good.
And once you've gone through all 4 steps, it's a sealed deal.
Yeah.
I know you can do it just the way we want it done.
Yeah.
And it's over, and you move on to the next
And
skill.
they know they can.
They know it. They're assured of it because your eyes were right there.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really a sharp thing, and
Sure.
I have to remind our staff and myself that in the business, because it's so easy to just say, watch me now, you do it. Can you imagine a doctor saying, watch me do this surgery? Okay, you do it.
Yeah, okay.
You
Give me
know?
gloves.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The thing with Jesus washing the feet, though, that really had to freak out all the apostles, though, right?
No kidding.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, that had to be, because, I mean, through 3 years he was showing them how to do things, right? And
Yeah.
teaching them things. And they've been other places where Jesus, I mean, they had to be a lot of places where they've always got their feet washed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Christ never did that, ever.
Yeah,
And
where
so all of a
was he
sudden-
where they didn't wash his
All of a
feet?
sudden, this one time he does it, I mean, I kind of understand why Peter would have said that at first, right?
Sure.
You met me in at work, and I worked for this guy forever. So one day he goes, hey, Jimmy, I'm washing your feet. And he's my CEO of the company. I'd be like, whoa, hold on, man. Hey, you ain't be a part of my company unless I do this. Okay, do it, right? So that had to really be just an incredible moment. And
Yeah, I would have delegated. I mean, quickly. I mean, I would have the delegation mentality. When somebody steps out of term, even we do that in our own culture. I mean, like, Pastor Roger coming here doing something, I'd say, hey, stop just a minute. Hang on, I got kids that do that. Stop that. And I would, it's human nature
yeah, so
to do that.
Think of that moment, because they've been in people's houses 1,000 times probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Christ never did that, and washed feet or had the slaves to do that. And then that one time where he did that, that had to be just an incredible thing. So.
Yeah, this gets to the next question. It's kind of related to the next question. Why do you think Peter protested at number 3? Why do you think Peter protested at having his feet washed by Jesus? What do you think that was?
The CEO. Yeah.
He's embarrassed.
Yeah.
Just
Bob.
kind of-
Yeah,
He was Lord.
Yeah.
Lord doesn't wash your feet.
I often kind
Slaves
of
wash
wondered
your
if Peter hadn't been thinking some point And they came in, nobody washed anybody's feet. Maybe it was like, maybe I should, what, no, I'm not gonna, no. In other words, maybe the thought had occurred to him, somebody needed to watch somebody's, maybe I should, no, that's beneath me, no, I wouldn't do that. I mean, that's just out of my imagination, not.
Can you imagine somebody coming into the room when that was happening? And being like, what is going on? Why is Jesus washing your
Sure.
feet?
Yeah. Bottom line, I think, is Peter protested this simply because this was just a breaking of custom. You know, I think that was probably his initial thought is, listen, this is not how we do that. You know, you're the teacher, you're the rabbi. You know, this is not your job. But, I mean, it could be seen a couple different ways. You have any other thoughts with that? It's just some things that I thought about.
Well, one of the things would be, he's thinking, like you said, Tom, he would never do it himself. He wouldn't do it, so he's like, what is this one that's, you know, greater than me doing it? Like, I would never consider doing this.
Yeah, that's good.
It says in
Good point.
in verse 1 there that having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So this was an act of love.
Yes. Yep, it was an act of love. Yeah, the context there, and I think it's actually after that, or is it before that? He does the whole thing. The context says displays this was an act of love. Yeah, good observation.
And I don't know, I can sympathize and kind of, so my mother-in-law got very sick and she needed help and I was the only female in the house and so I helped her in the restroom and she was so embarrassed but she was physically not able to do it. And so, I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's that same kind of, you should not be doing this, Daphne. You should not be doing this. And I'm like, it's okay. I love you, and this is what we're going to do. So I kind of go back to thinking like that. You know?
That's right. It's that way. It's that way of thinking. But, you know, it would be one thing, and I don't know that the rest of the question again, it'd be one thing to say you're breaking custom, and that was the end of the story. Like, no, you're not going to wash my feet. But the story goes on. And Jesus keeps bringing them back to what he was doing in the story and teaching them, because part of that is what I was doing, you too need to be doing this to one another. You know, and that's really where the crux of the story is. I'll be honest with you. It's not with Peter's, no, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet thing. I think that's part of it. I think that reveals where Peter's thinking was, which was off base. But when Jesus comes along and says, but this is what I want you to do to one another, that's the nail in the coffin, you know, in terms of, you know, I was actually teaching you something there. That is the proof that I was teaching you something, because what I want you to do is I want you to serve one another in that kind of way. You know.
If you think about feet, if I were to walk up to Judy and say, Judy, I'm going to wash your feet, how would you feel about that? You'd be like, what? Why aren't you washing my feet? But think about those times. They're walking maybe open-toed sandals, so their feet are filthy.
And the dust.
And the dust and the dirt and the poop and all the rest of that stuff that's out there. Feet are disgusting. So for him to go and say, you're going to get into the dirt of this kind of serving and humble yourself in that way, that's huge.
I'd say too, though, but like the Lord knew like Peter would react like that.
Sure.
Because he said to him, he goes, he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, Lord, you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand.
Yeah.
So it's like the Lord knew that he was going to react that way.
Sure.
And then he told him, like, but when I do this, you'll understand. And then he did. And then Peter goes, man, not only my feet,
Wash my whole body.
right? So the Lord knew he was going to react like that and stuff. So I think any one of us would have probably acted like that, right?
Sure.
And probably any one of the other apostles probably would have acted like that, not just Peter.
Yeah, and part of going back to this number 3, why do you think Peter's protest at having his feet washed by Jesus? Part of it is I think this is what you said, but he didn't fully understand maybe who Jesus was, at least in degree, but probably more explicitly in terms of he didn't understand what Jesus was actually trying to accomplish at this point. And then he turns around and says, I want you to go and do likewise. And that was the point where, I think where they begin hopefully to be able to comprehend it. Let's look at number 4. Jesus exhibited both the greatest self-esteem and the greatest self-esteem and the greatest self-sacrifice. How are both qualities demonstrated in his menial work of washing his disciples' feet? Did you get that? That was a harder question. How did you get that?
He was not diminished by washing their feet.
Mm-hmm.
He knew who he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. His service didn't diminish his title, right? What's some other thoughts? Anybody have any other thoughts?
I think that we tend to not want to do the menial things because we think pretty much of ourselves.
Right.
And we want other people to think pretty much of us.
Yeah.
And well, that just might, take me to, boy, if I did that, they'll be walking on me like a rug for the rest of my life. That'll be, it's actually a pride thing. It's actually
Sure.
Whereas Jesus knew fully who he was, not just the grandeur and the glory of who he was, but the security of who he was. That he was completely and utterly secure in the Father and in the Father's love, and there was nothing he could do to lessen that in any way. So he could go as low as he wanted to. It's very interesting too to think, even in the mentioning of the, feet are filthy, such vile, filthy things. He took the dirtiest part of them to cleanse.
Mm-hmm.
I also flashed on Peter going, Jesus says, I'm going to Jerusalem, they're going to spit on me and kick me around and beat me and nail me to a cross, and I'm going to die and then rise again. And Peter goes, no, this will never happen to you. Mm-hmm. That's not right. Mm-hmm. You're better than this, and it's kind of the same thing. He's doing kind of the same thing. Yeah. And it's also the same thing in that Jesus, in going to the cross, was cleansing the dirtiest part of all of us.
Yeah. Something that we really, this I don't think the question revolves around this at all. But when Peter, I'm going to try to find it right quick. He came to Simon Peter, said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus, you do not realize now what I'm going to do, but you will later understand. No, said Peter, you will never wash my feet. Jesus says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me.
That was the ceremonial
Yeah.
before Peter's death, right?
What's that?
Wasn't that the Jesus giving Peter a little bit about this is going to be your future and this is the ceremonial washing of your body before you're dead?
It could be, but I'm also thinking in terms of this washing being representative of the forgiveness of sins, too. Because I think when he says, unless I wash you, right, you can have no part with me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just purely the act of service, which I think a lot of times in these Gospels there's always a parallel story. Especially in John's Gospel, I think becomes very clear, kind of a parallel story. One is the physical washing, the act of service, and unless you are willing to become a servant, you can have no part with me. But he's also got this parallel story there of the picture of washing. And in other words, unless I wash you clean, through the blood, maybe that, then you have no part with me. And I don't want to say that's a stretch. I think it's there, but I think it's.
He went low to wash their feet, and he went even lower to take the sin of the whole world on himself.
And he took their filth. He humbled himself, and took their filth and washed them clean. I think there's a lot could be said about that. There's a lot of metaphor within that. All right, what were we saying? Did I read 4 already?
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 5. Jesus acknowledged himself as teacher and Lord while setting the example of foot washing, verses 13 through 15. How would you describe the character of that sort of Lord and teacher?
One is that he's a leader, and he's kind of playing follow the leader. This is what I'm going to do, and I want you to do it.
Yeah.
Leading by example.
Leading by example. Turn over. This is a thought that I had. Turn over to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. I'll start in verse 26, but we'll get down to verse 28. That's the main thing. It says, "It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Especially in the Gospel of Mark. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is pictured, differently, say, than in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John, we've talked about, the Gospel of John kind of presents Jesus as king. Maybe not king, but the sovereign Lord of these things, that he was judge. Remember how in the other Gospels, Jesus is always portrayed in this trial motif, that he's always under judgment, But in John's gospel, it portrays him as the one doing the judging all the way across, where man thinks he's in control, and and Jesus is going from trial to trial to trial as if Jesus is in man's court system. But the way John writes the Gospel of John, he displays God's sovereignty through the person of Christ, and he shows and makes it very clear that the true judge is Jesus himself, and that these leaders are the ones that's on trial. But in Mark's gospel, it's very clear that he portrays Christ from the point of view as the suffering servant. Okay, and we see it here portrayed in Matthew, which is akin to when you go and read Isaiah. Isaiah talks about this suffering servant. And so when you look at Matthew chapter 28 and talk about the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus, and this is just what I wrote down, he was who he said he was. He was ultimately the suffering servant who did not come to be served, but to give himself as a ransom for many. When you talk about Lord and teacher, you see, this relationship that one role does not diminish the other. He does not, even though he left glory, he left his throne, he left all of what he did, he humbled himself, but yet that did not diminish who he was. He was still Lord. But he was the Lord who was the suffering servant. And that suffering servant did not come to be served, but he came to give his life to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Read this little box here at the bottom. Though he knelt before them doing the work of a slave, Jesus was not groveling before his disciples. His act of service came from a strong sense of who he was. He was confident of his role and his identity as the Son of God. And if this was his role and this was his identity, it should be our role and identity as his children.
And I dare say it really demonstrated that he genuinely, deeply cared for their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
That it wasn't just a classroom. He had a personal investment in them, and he had a deep care for them.
True.
And there was this need. They had dirty feet, and nobody washed them. Very, something that was necessary in that day.
It was part of being a good host, is to make sure that your guests' feet were washed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he cared for their well-being.
Yeah.
They probably were all sitting there going, "Oh, why am I washing my feet?"
Mm-hmm.
He cared for their well-being.
Sure.
Well, if I had just cleaned house, I wouldn't want you walking in with those dirty feet.
And they'd already eaten dinner at that point, and then he washed their feet.
Yeah. Which is a break of custom. Going back to the breaking of custom, you always did the cleansing and the foot washing prior to these things, but yet he waited to the end of the meal to do it.
Yeah, when you walk into the house.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that was kind of making even more of a clear statement to them, like, we've been here this whole time and nobody's come forward to do this. Now I'm going to do it for you.
Yeah. That's perceptive. I think that's probably the case.
Like, that might hit me a little bit more.
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah.
Let's put number 6. Put yourself in Peter's sandals. How would you have reacted when Jesus started to wash your feet?
The same way as Peter. I've been like, please don't touch my feet. Please, let me do yours. I'll take care of yours.
Yep. No
I
doubt.
think I would have wanted to help him. I wouldn't have wanted to let him do it. You'd let him do it, but you wouldn't want to let him do it by himself. And there's like, you were hinting at, like, there's like almost a foreshadowing of the cross in
Yes.
this. And it's like, there's a part of us that really doesn't really want to totally trust that Jesus did the complete
We
washing.
want to help him, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't owe you anything.
Yeah, that's very good. I love that. I love that.
I'm thinking of the Galatians things,
Oh,
that's where I'm going with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You foolish Galatians.
You foolish Galatians.
You started in faith. What are you doing?
Yeah, he didn't like their adding and twisting and perverting of the gospel. All right. What time is it?
You have used your time.
Quarter after.
It's
You
14 after.
blew
We
by
gave
the
you
time.
10
All right.
Let's do it because we thoroughly enjoy you.
Well, I tell you what. Let's call it there. Next week, chapter 4. Any final thoughts or questions to these?
Very good.
I like the chapter. It was like weird because like the questions almost didn't go a lot with the chapter.
Yeah.
It was like the chapter was a lot about it was like almost how Christ was God
Mm.
and sinless. There's a lot of that, and I
Yeah.
liked how they tied it all together like that. Like the writer, how he just brought it all out. Even like Janelle said that tonight and stuff, and it was like, and it just like, and like I don't know what the comment was in there. Like the closer we get to God, the more we realize what sinners we are and how we just fall so short
Yeah.
of it. And then like when you're talking, like what keeps us away from knowing the fullness of God,
Oh yeah.
the love of God. Like what is it like in my life that does that? What in your life, Pastor Dan, or in Pam's life or Liz, like what keeps us all from wanting to know that? Wouldn't it be like the best thing for us? Why do we do that? It's
Yeah.
Why don't we want that?
I think it tells you a lot about who we are deep down inside.
Not good.
Not good. We
No.
I mean, I'm just
No.
honestly,
Right.
and we prefer. Well, it goes back to the passage I preached not too long ago. Moses chose the adversity of going and being with his people and being under the persecution rather than enjoying the wealth and the prosperity that he had, back with the people of Egypt, being called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and it's easy to think in terms of what I like, what brings me pleasure, what makes me content, and rather than looking at what Christ offers, and yeah, that's good and everything, but I got this over here.
To live Ecclesiastes.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna have this and have this and have that.
I like how that author just did all that about like how Christ, like when he was asking like, which one of you convict me of sin? Like they never sin. Like who is anybody that you'd ever been around that you could say that like they're perfect? I mean, just think about people that were with him.